Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
I was Georgia Mitchell then, owner of the Mitchell Gallery in Chelsea. 28 years old, successful, untouchable. My world was measured in auction prices and commission percentages. Art was business, pure and simple. Buy low, sell high. Don't get attached. I had rules, systems, boundaries that kept everything neat and profitable. Then Ava walked into my gallery on a Tuesday morning in October, and my perfectly ordered world tilted on its axis. She stood in front of a Rothko reproduction, not even an original, mind you, for 47 minutes. I timed her. She didn't move, barely blinked, just stared at those bleeding reds and oranges like they were speaking to her in some ancient language I'd forgotten how to understand. It's not real, I finally said, approaching her with my practiced gallery smile. She turned, and those dark eyes, God, those eyes looked right through me. Does that matter? Of course it matters. The original's worth 40 million. This is worth 400. Ava laughed, a sound like silver bells with a hint of mischief. You measure everything in dollars, don't you, Georgia Mitchell? She knew my name. I should have asked how, but I was too busy trying to figure out why my chest felt tight, why my perfectly climate-controlled gallery suddenly felt too warm. It's how the world works, I said, not my world. She touched the wall next to the painting, her fingers tracing the air just inches from the canvas. In my world, this reproduction has watched 1,000 people walk by without really seeing it. It's absorbed their indifference, their hurried footsteps, their phone conversations about lunch plans and stock prices. But it's also caught the occasional person who stops, really stops, and lets it speak to them. That history, that invisible accumulation of human moments, you can't put a price on that. I should have walked away. Should have let her philosophize. Alone and gone back to my inventory spreadsheets. Instead, I found myself asking, what do you do? Besides stand in galleries, making everyone else feel shallow, I restore damaged paintings. I bring things back to life. She smiled, and something in my chest did a little flip. What about you? Besides run this beautiful mausoleum for the soul? We talked until closing time. Then we went for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into me showing her my private collection in the back room pieces I'd never sell, never show, never even admit I owned for purely sentimental reasons. See? She said, standing before a small watercolor I'd painted in college. You don't measure everything in dollars. She was right, and that terrified me. Eva became a regular at the gallery. She'd arrive around 11 with coffee for both of us, spending her lunch breaks wandering my exhibitions like she was exploring sacred ground. We'd argue about the meaning of art, the value of authenticity, the difference between price and worth. She was infuriating, brilliant, passionate about everything I'd trained myself not to care about. You're afraid of feeling things? She accused one evening as we shared wine in my office after hours. I'm practical, I countered. You're terrified. She moved closer, her voice softening. What happened to you, Georgia? What made you build all these walls? I could have deflected. Should have. Instead, I found myself telling her about my father, about growing up in a house where love was conditional, where worth was measured in achievements and bank balances, about learning early that caring too much, wanting too much, only led to disappointment. Eva listened without judgment, without trying to fix me. When I finished, she simply said, "That sounds lonely." It was so lonely. 3 months after we met, Eva kissed me. We were standing in front of a Van Gogh Another reproduction, and she was explaining how the artist's mental illness influenced his brushstrokes, how pain could create such extraordinary beauty. I was watching her lips move, trying to focus on her words instead of wondering what it would feel like to kiss her. "Georgia," she said, catching me staring, "are you even listening?" "No," I admitted. She laughed, stepped closer, and suddenly, her hands were in my hair and her mouth was on mine, and every rule I'd ever made about mixing business with pleasure, about keeping people at arm's length, about protecting my heart, all of it crumbled. For 6 weeks, I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy for the first time in years. Eva would stay over at my apartment, making breakfast while I checked auction results, humming off-key while she read art history books in my bed. We'd take long walks through the city, and she'd point out street art I'd never noticed, architecture, details I'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing. She made me see everything differently, made me feel everything differently, which is why, when I found the medical bills scattered across her kitchen table one morning, my world didn't just tilt, it shattered completely. Congenital heart defect, critical, surgery required. Cost $247,000. Insurance coverage, $12,000. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. Eva emerged from the shower, saw me standing there, and her face went white. "Georgia, I can explain." "How long?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "How long what? How long have you known?" "About your heart?" She wrapped her robe tighter around herself, suddenly looking fragile in a way that made my chest ache. 2 years. Maybe 3. And the surgery? I'm on a waiting list for a clinical trial. If I get accepted, it's free. If not. She shrugged, trying for casual and failing completely. "Ava." I set the bills down carefully, like they might explode. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd do this. I knew you'd try to fix it, to throw money at it, to make it your problem." Her voice was rising, defensive. "I don't need to be saved, Georgia. I'm not some broken painting in your restoration studio." But that's exactly what she was to me. This beautiful, irreplaceable work of art that was damaged, and I had the resources to fix her. How could I not try? That night, I couldn't sleep. I researched her condition, called doctors, looked into private loans. The numbers were impossible. Even with my gallery's success, I didn't have that kind of liquid capital, but I knew people who did. Collectors who paid in cash, who didn't ask too many questions about provenance. The Drowning Woman hung in my private collection, a small oil painting from the 1800s that I'd inherited from my grandmother. Its provenance was murky, possibly stolen during World War II, which made it impossible to sell through traditional channels. But in the right circles, to the right buyer, it could be worth enough to fund Ava's surgery. I told myself it was just this once, one painting to save the woman I loved. The dark web is easier to navigate than you'd think when desperation is your guide. I found a contact within hours, anonymous, professional, willing to pay top dollar for pieces with complicated histories. We arranged to meet at a warehouse in Queens. "You sure about this?" the buyer asked, examining the painting under harsh fluorescent lights. He was younger than I'd expected, wearing an expensive suit and speaking with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Once this leaves here, there's no getting it back." "Unsure," I lied. The briefcase full of cash felt heavier than it should have. Walking back to my car, I kept waiting for FBI agents to surround me, for sirens, for the weight of justice to crash down. Instead, there was just silence and the sound of my heels on concrete. Ava's surgery was scheduled for the following month. 1 painting became 2. 2 became 5. Ava's surgery was successful, but there were complications, follow-up procedures, medications that weren't covered by insurance. Each time I told myself it was the last time, the final piece I'd sell to keep her alive and healthy. I became Anne, expert in the shadow economy of stolen art, learned to forge provenance documents, to create false histories that would satisfy buyers who didn't look too closely. I established relationships with contacts across Europe and Asia, people who moved art the way others moved drugs or weapons. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, falling deeper into a world of deception and crime, all in the name of love. Eva, who taught me to see beauty in imperfection, truth, and authenticity, was unknowingly driving me to become everything I'd once despised. She never asked where the money came from. Maybe she suspected, maybe she chose not to know. We were both living in a kind of willful blindness, focused on her recovery, on building a life together that felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. But the FBI had been watching, building a case. Following the money, it was a Thursday, in March when they came. Eva was at my apartment, cooking dinner and complaining about a difficult restoration project she was working on. I was in my office, arranging the sale of a stolen Degas sketch to a collector in Singapore. The pounding on my door was unmistakable, that particular rhythm that means badges and warrants and handcuffs. Eva looked at me from the kitchen, confusion, turning to understanding, turning to horror as she saw my face. Georgia, her voice was small, afraid. Back door, I said, already moving. Now, what's happening? Just go, please. But Eva didn't run. Even as the front door splintered, even as armed agents flooded into my apartment shouting commands, she stood her ground beside me. When they cuffed us both, when they read us our rights, she looked directly at the lead agent and said she didn't know. This was all me. Eva, no. I forged the documents, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I arranged the sales. Georgia's gallery was just the front. She's innocent. It was a beautiful lie and completely unbelievable. But Eva sold it with the same passion she brought to everything else, creating an elaborate story about how she'd manipulated me, used my resources and connections while keeping me in the dark about the illegal activity. They separated us immediately. I was taken to one interrogation room, Eva to another, and for 14 hours I sat in that gray, windowless box while federal agents laid out evidence of my crimes with methodical precision. Agent Sarah Martinez was patient, professional, almost kind as she walked me through the case they built. Bank records, email trails, surveillance photos showing me at meetings with known art traffickers. They had everything. We know she was lying, Agent Martinez said, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed me shaking hands with the same buyer who'd purchased the drowning woman, both of us clearly visible in the harsh warehouse lighting. Eva Gray is not a criminal mastermind. Ms. Mitchell, she is a woman with a heart condition whose medical bills bankrupted her girlfriend. I stared at the photo, seeing myself as if for the first time. Expensive clothes, confident posture, briefcase full of illegal money. When had I become this person? She's trying to protect you, the agent continued. But her story doesn't hold up. We have evidence going back months, showing a pattern of increasingly sophisticated art fraud. This isn't the work of an amateur. What happens to her? I asked. That depends on you. The deal was simple. Full cooperation in exchange for leniency for Eva. I would provide information about my buyers, help them trace stolen works, testify in court about the network I'd become part of. In return, Eva would face minimal charges community service. Probation, a chance to rebuild her life. I signed the papers without hesitation. The investigation took months. I helped the FBI track down 17 stolen paintings, provided evidence that led to arrests across 3 countries, and watched my entire world burn down around me. The gallery was seized, my reputation destroyed, my bank accounts frozen. Eva visited me once while I was waiting for sentencing. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in months, color back in her cheeks, but her eyes were different, guarded. Why? She asked. Why didn't you just tell me? We could have figured something else out. Like what? Let you die while we held fundraisers and applied for grants? I leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. I couldn't lose you, Eva. I couldn't watch you slip away when I had the power to save you. But this isn't saving, she said. Quietly, this is destroying everything we built together. She was right, of course. In trying to preserve what we had, I'd poisoned it beyond repair. The trust was gone, replaced by guilt and shame and the terrible knowledge that my love had twisted into something unrecognizable. I'd do it again, I told her, and I meant it. Even knowing how it ends, I'd do it all again to keep you alive. Eva started crying then, and when she reached across the table to take my hand, I knew it was goodbye. I was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole in 18 months for cooperation. The judge was surprisingly understanding, acknowledging the circumstances that led to my crimes, while making it clear that good intentions didn't excuse breaking the law. Prison wasn't like the movies. It was boring, mostly. Gray walls, gray. Food, gray days that blended together until time lost all meaning. I worked in the library, teaching literacy classes to women who'd never learned to read properly. It was the first time in years that I felt useful for something other than my connections or my bank account. I wrote letters to Eva that I never sent, hundreds of them, apologies and explanations and desperate attempts to justify what I'd done. None of them seemed adequate. The art world moved on without me. My gallery was sold, my client list distributed among competitors. Articles were written about my case, academic papers exploring the intersection of love and crime, the psychology of white-collar criminals. I became a cautionary tale, a footnote in someone else's success story. I was released after 22 months. Good behavior, continued cooperation with ongoing investigations, and what my lawyer called genuine remorse had earned me early parole. I walked out of federal prison with $200 in gate money, a plastic bag of belongings, and no idea what came next. Eva was waiting for me. She looked different, older, more settled somehow. Her hair was shorter, and she was wearing a simple blue dress I'd never seen before. When she smiled, I could see the faint scar from her surgery running down her chest, a reminder of everything we'd been through. Hello, Georgia. Ava. My voice cracked on her name. What are you doing here? Someone has to give you a ride. She gestured toward a beat-up Honda Civic parked nearby. Unless you'd prefer to take the bus. The drive was quiet at first. I stared out the window at a world that looked exactly the same and completely different, trying to process the fact that Ava was here, that she'd come for me after everything I'd done. Where are we going? I finally asked. There's something I want to show you. She drove us to a part of Brooklyn I'd never visited, pulling up in front of a converted warehouse with large windows and a hand-painted sign. Community Art Center, all welcome. I started teaching here while you were away, Ava explained, as we walked toward the entrance. Art therapy for kids who've been through trauma, adults struggling with addiction, people who need a safe space to express things they can't put into words. Inside, the space was alive with creative energy. Canvases covered in bold, imperfect brushstrokes lined the walls. Sculptures made from recycled materials stood in corners. Children's drawings hung from string like prayer flags, full of hope, and pain and possibility. It's beautiful, I said, and meant it. The city's been trying to shut us down, Ava continued, leading me through the space. Budget cuts, property disputes, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. We're losing our lease at the end of the month. She stopped in front of a small office tucked behind the main studio space. Through the glass, I could see financial documents spread across a desk, bills and notices, and the familiar panic of numbers that didn't add up. We need help, Ava said simply. Someone who understands business, who knows how to navigate systems and find funding. Someone who's made mistakes and learned from them. I understood what she was offering. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something more valuable. A chance to use my skills for something that mattered. To channel my particular talents toward creation instead of destruction. I can't pay much, she warned. Actually, I can't pay anything. At least not at first. I don't need money, I said. I need purpose. Working at the community center was humbling in ways I hadn't expected. My fancy business degree meant nothing to 8-year-olds who wanted to paint dinosaurs in impossible colors. My understanding of market dynamics was useless when dealing with teenagers who expressed their trauma through graffiti-style murals that would never hang in a gallery. But slowly, I learned a different language of value. I watched a woman in her 60s discover she could sculpt after a lifetime of being told she wasn't artistic. I saw kids who'd never owned anything nice create masterpieces from cardboard and bottle caps. I learned that sometimes the most valuable art is the kind that will never sell, never hang in a museum, never be preserved for posterity because its value lies in the creating, not the keeping. Eva and I worked together but carefully maintaining professional boundaries that protected us both. She was friendly but distant, including me in staff meetings and group activities while keeping her personal life private. I respected that distance even as it ached, understanding that trust, once broken, might never fully heal. The center was bleeding money, surviving month to month on small grants and donations. I threw myself into the problem with the same intensity. I'd once brought to illegal art sales, researching funding sources, writing grant applications, developing sustainable revenue streams through classes and workshops. 6 months after my release, we secured a major grant from a foundation focused on arts education. It was enough to save the center, to expand our programs, to hire additional staff. The day the check arrived, Ava hugged me brief, professional, but genuine. Thank you, she said. You saved us. We saved each other, I replied, and for the first time since my arrest, I felt like maybe that was true. A year later, I was in my tiny apartment reviewing budget projections when Eva knocked on my door. It was late, past 10, and she looked agitated in a way that immediately set me on edge. Are you okay? I asked, letting her in. There's something you need to know. She paced my small living room like a caged animal. About the medical bills. About why I never asked where the money came from. I sat down hard, feeling the ground shift beneath me again. Eva, I knew, she said simply. Not at first, but eventually. I knew you were selling things you shouldn't, working with people you shouldn't. And I let you do it because I was scared and desperate and I wanted to live. The confession hung between us like smoke. I'd spent 2 years believing that my deception had protected her, that she'd been an innocent victim of my criminal choices. Learning that she'd known, that she'd been complicit in her own way, should have made me angry. Instead, it made me feel oddly relieved. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, because I'm tired of carrying the guilt. Because you went to prison protecting a lie, and because... She stopped pacing, turned to face me directly. Because I never stopped loving you, and I'm tired of pretending that I did. The words hit me like a physical blow. I convinced myself that whatever we'd had was over, that my actions had destroyed not just our relationship, but her feelings. For me entirely. Hearing that she still loved me, that she'd been carrying her own burden of guilt and regret, changed everything. Ava, I started, but she held up a hand. I'm not asking for us to go back to what we were. That Georgia and Eva don't exist anymore, but maybe we could figure out who we are now. Together. We took it slow. Coffee dates that felt like first dates, long walks where we relearned each other's thoughts and dreams. We talked about prison, about the community center, about the art world we'd both left behind. We were different people now, shaped by loss and guilt and the hard work of rebuilding. Ava's heart was strong, her scars barely visible unless you knew where to look. My scars were less obvious but ran deeper the knowledge that I was capable of crimes I'd never imagined, that love could make me both noble and monstrous. But we were healing, both of us. The community center thrived under our joint leadership, my business skills complementing Ava's artistic vision. We developed programs for formerly incarcerated individuals, understanding firsthand the challenges of reintegration. We partnered with hospitals to bring art therapy to patients facing their own medical crises. 2 years after Ava's late-night confession, she moved back in with me. Not to my old luxury apartment that life was gone forever, but to a modest place near the center where we could hear kids playing in the courtyard and smell paint and clay and the particular scent of creativity in the air. We were careful with each other, mindful of the cracks in our foundation that would always be there. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. Some days were harder than others. Some days the weight of what we'd done, what we'd lost, felt too heavy to carry. But we carried it together. 3 years after my release, Ava surprised me with a trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was my first time back in a major gallery since my arrest. And I was nervous about how it would feel to be surrounded by the kind of art I'd once traded in shadows. "You sure about this?" she asked as we climbed the steps. "No, but let's do it anyway." Inside, the familiar weight of history and beauty pressed down on us. We moved slowly through the galleries, Ava pointing out techniques and historical context, while I tried to remember how to look at art without calculating its market value. We stopped in front of a Van Gogh, The Potato Eaters, dark and rough and honest in a way that made my chest tight. Ava stood beside me, close enough that I could feel her warmth, and we looked at it together in comfortable silence. "Do you know what I love about this painting?" she asked finally. "Tell me. It's not beautiful in any conventional sense. The people are plain, the setting is humble, the technique is rough around the edges. But Van Gogh painted it with such tenderness, such respect for these ordinary people living ordinary lives. He saw dignity where others might see only poverty." She turned to look at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's what you taught me, Georgia, to see dignity in broken things, to find value in what others might discard." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small box that made my heart stop. "I know we can't get married legally yet, but I want to promise you something anyway. I want to promise that I see you, not the woman who committed crimes, not the woman who went to prison, but the woman who learned from her mistakes and chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage." The ring was simple, elegant, engraved, with a line from a poem Eva had written during my incarceration, "From Ashes Art." "Eva Gray," I said, taking the ring with shaking hands, "are you asking me to marry you in front of a Van Gogh? And asking you to keep building a life with? M.E., whatever that looks like, wherever it leads us." I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling its weight like a promise, like possibility, like hope. "Yes," I said. "Yes to all of it. That was 5 years ago. We're married now, legally, officially, surrounded by our chosen family of artists and activists and formerly incarcerated individuals who understand that people are more than the worst things they've done." The Gray Mitchell Community Arts Center kicks up an entire city block now, with studios and classrooms and exhibition spaces that showcase work by people whose voices have traditionally been marginalized. We employ 23 people, serve over 500 individuals annually, and last year we were featured in Art in America for our innovative approaches to art therapy and community healing. I still have bad days. Days when I wake up feeling like an imposter, when the weight of my past crimes feels too heavy to carry. Days when I look at Eva and wonder if she really forgives me or if she's just gotten good at living with disappointment. But mostly, I have good days. Days when I watch a shy teenager discover they can express their pain through sculpture, when a former gang member finds peace in watercolor landscapes, when a woman my age learns to see herself as an artist instead of just a survivor. Eva still restores damaged paintings in her spare time, bringing broken things back to life with patience and skill and love. I run the business side of the center, using the same analytical skills that once served illegal purposes to secure grants and manage budgets and navigate the complex world of nonprofit administration. We're not the same people who fell in love. In that gallery 7 years ago, those women were younger, more naive, less aware of their own capacity for both destruction and creation. We're scarred now, both of us, marked by choices and consequences and the long work of forgiveness. But we're also stronger. We know what it costs to love someone enough to risk everything for them. We know what it takes to rebuild trust after it's been shattered. We know that redemption isn't a destination, but a daily choice to do better than we did before. So that's my story. That's how I became a criminal, and how crime became the path to becoming who I was meant to be. I won't pretend it was worth it. The pain we caused each other, the time we lost, the damage that can never be fully undone. I won't romanticize the choices I made or suggest that love justifies breaking the law. But I will say this, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that happens to you. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted reveals what you actually need. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. I learned that art isn't about value, it's about truth. That love isn't about protecting someone from consequences, it's about walking through those consequences together. That redemption isn't something you earn through good behavior, it's something you choose. Again and again, every day for the rest of your life. Eva taught me to see beauty in broken things, including myself. The FBI taught me that actions have consequences, even when they're motivated by love. Prison taught me that who you are isn't determined by your worst moment, but by what you do with all the moments that come after. And life, messy and complicated and beautiful life, taught me that sometimes the most profound transformations come from the deepest falls. I'm Georgia Gray Mitchell now, wife to Eva, co-director of a community arts center that changes lives every day, former federal prisoner, former art criminal, former woman who measured everything in dollars and nothing in dreams.